Hello friends, welcome to another episode of Down Home with me, your host, the Ramblin' Southern Gentleman. I hope everyone has had a great week. I believe I've got a great show lined up for you today, so pour yourself a big glass of ice cold sweet tea, kick your shoes off, take a load off and set a spell. Let the cares and the worries of this past week slip away while I take you down memory lane, attempt to make you chuckle a little bit, and maybe, just maybe, even bring something you didn't already know to your doorstep. As regular listeners already know, I like to feature a southern food or a treat every episode. So, today, while I'm flapping my jaws, I'm enjoying a southern classic. Something I grew up on and enjoyed as a child just as much as I enjoy it today. I know, just spit it out and cut the fluff. I'm talking about a peanut butter, banana, and mayonnaise sandwich. Yes, you heard that right, so pull your chin up off the floor. I said mayonnaise. When I talk about these sandwiches, a lot of people have tried a peanut butter and banana sandwich, but turn their noses skyward when I include mayonnaise in the mix. Yes, I'll admit, even though I grew up on these, and so did many in my circle, mayonnaise does not seem like a altogether great addition. I'm always surprised at the number of people I encounter that absolutely will not partake of mayonnaise in any way. They're just missing out. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. I just hate that many people are missing out on such a rich joy of life. But I digress. But folks, just do yourself a favor, and if you've not tried this delicacy, make yourself one. If you have already had a peanut butter and banana sandwich but haven't tried it with mayonnaise, just go ahead and try it. I promise you, you won't regret it. That mix of the salty and sweet just hits, well, just right. I think the first time I experienced this treat was at my grandmother's house. Nanny Ree, as we called her, would fix these for us as well as Paul. When I think back to Nanny Ree's house and her kitchen, there are three distinct smells that I can remember so vividly being present. Well, four, but the most prominent is the smell of peanut butter, banana, and mayonnaise sandwiches. You wouldn't think it would be such a distinctive smell, but it really is. It really sticks out strong in my mind. It's a very unique smell when all three of those ingredients come together on a fresh loaf of bread. Most of all, it's a supremely comforting smell. The other three smells that always seem to permeate her kitchen, not at the same time, of course, but separately, were the smells of pintos and cornbread, then beef stew, and at times, butter and sugar toast. A real treat for a child, and it was an even more precious treat for a little girl named Marie up on Spann Mountain in the thick of the Great Depression in Alabama. That's when Nanny Ree, as a small girl, learned how to put together those simple ingredients of butter and sugar on top of a piece of bread and then toast it. However, even those simple ingredients we oh so greatly take for granted today were precious commodities back then. Hence, it was such a special treat to be cherished and enjoyed. Of course, when Nanny treated us to it when me and my sister were little and told us the stories of the hardships of the Great Depression and how it was such a special treat during her childhood, it endured it to our hearts as well and became a special little treat to be enjoyed between a loving and caring grandmother and her much-loved grandkids. Now, our featured phrase for today was submitted by a listener, and that is, "Ain't no hill too high for a high stepper." Now, I think that should be pretty obvious, the meaning behind it. If you're a high stepper, then you can get up on a hill that's in your way pretty quickly. Now, when I go looking for topics and researching those topics for this show, I come across all kinds of topics, both interesting and some, well, weird. I was looking for something to complement this show, and I happened to remember an article I read a while back about weird laws of Alabama. So, that's the direction I went in. I was both amused and perplexed by some of the weird and odd laws I came across just for my home state of Alabama. Let's pretend we're going to take a road trip. Let's say we're going to set sail on the highways and byways of the great state of Alabama. Let's review how our trip will be shaped by all of these weird and odd laws I came across during my research. So I'm getting ready to leave my home here in northeast Alabama. I've loaded up the truck and about to go on down to Mobile for some rest and relaxation. Now, I've got to be sure I have got my shoes on because it's, in fact, illegal to drive barefoot in the state of Alabama. As a side note, some of you need to take heed to this when jumping in that old family horseless wagon to mosey on down to the Dollar General. Anyways, so I've got my shoes on. Now I need to be sure to leave my blindfold at home because it's also illegal to drive blindfolded in Alabama. Glad they made that a law because I might have gotten too adventurous and set out totally blinded while navigating my way onto I-59. Another thing I need to make sure of before I take flight onto the public roadways of Alabama, I need to make sure that my dog is not on the roof of my vehicle because that too is illegal in Alabama. I guess at some point it became necessary to codify that statute here in the state of Alabama because that situation was becoming a problem at some point. So check, my dog is not on the roof of my vehicle. Good. Moving on. One last thing to check off that checklist before I get on the roadway is to make sure I have a lantern affixed to the front of my vehicle on the off chance that I encounter a one-way street that I want to go down in the wrong direction. Because at one time it was on the Alabama law books that you could in fact drive down the wrong way of a one-way street as long as you were considerate enough to strap a lantern to the front of your wagon or vehicle. Now that I've checked everything off my pre-trip checklist, we can now take to the open road. We must be careful, however, and use restraint while on the trip, though. If we come to some railroad tracks, we must by all means not allow our desire to put some salt on said railroad tracks win. If we do, and we pour salt on some railroad tracks, we could face the death penalty. Yes, you heard that right. Technically, at one time, you could face the death penalty for pouring salt on the railroad tracks. Well, at least in the 1800s, it was punishable by death. At least that's what the law book said. Nowadays, it still constitutes a serious felony. Now, you may be saying at this point, Jason, why in the world would it be illegal to pour salt on railroad tracks? Well, there's a simple answer, and a good reason. It attracts cattle to the railroad tracks because, as it turns out, cows really enjoy the taste of salt. It seems that there was a big problem back in the old days where cattle farmers would lure their cattle and the cattle of their competitors to railroad tracks in order to be taken out by a passing train. Now, you may be saying, why on earth would they do that? Well, the reason being, the railroad companies, by law, would be made to pay compensation to the farmer for their cows that met their demise by their train. It seems to have been very hefty compensation as well, more so than that they could have made from selling their cattle on the market, or maybe the market was too far and they wouldn't be able to sell the cow, and they couldn't possibly eat that much meat, so it was just easier to have it taken out on the railway and have the railroad pay for it. It was also a way to get revenge on a rival farmer. After being on the road for a couple of hours, we'll be busting Montgomery wide open. Now, while we're in Montgomery, please do not open an umbrella on the sidewalk if we stop to tour the state capitol or stop to eat in downtown Montgomery. While you may want to keep that spring shower from soaking you, you would be totally inconsiderate because by opening said umbrella, you may spook a horse. If you do that, it could take off down the street while being attached to a buggy or a wagon. And if it's not tethered to anything, it may run off never to be seen by the owner again. And whether it's pulling a wagon or a buggy or by itself, it could end up trampling people after being spooked by your umbrella. So, that at one time was against the law to do. Speaking of horses, if we stop and purchase some ice cream before getting back on the road, be careful not to put said ice cream in your back pocket. If you do, you'll be in violation of the law. You see, it's illegal to put ice cream in your back pocket in the state of Alabama. It seems as though this was a popular trick amongst horse thieves back in the day. They would put the ice cream in their back pocket to stealthily lure horses away from their hitching place on the street to where the horse thief would steal them away once they had been lured away, possibly around the corner into a seedy alley. Thankfully, since now we rely on mostly automobiles and less on horse and buggy travel, this isn't much of a concern now. But just to be safe, keep that ice cream out of your back pocket while you're on the trip with me. I don't have the time nor patience to be hauled off down to the courthouse to explain why you were in violation of this statute. We have places to go, things to do, and people to see. Finally, we've arrived in Mobile after 6 hours. I don't know about you, but after that trip, I'm ready to go downtown and enjoy some festivities since you didn't help me drive any of the way down. So, we go out and find that we cannot throw confetti or shoot off some silly string. Well, that just won't do. So we get back in the truck and motor on down to Daphne, thinking we can have a little fun and indulge in some celebratory mess makers. Well, we're out of luck, because there's a ban on those celebratory mess makers. We can't paint anything with shaving cream. There's no silly string blowing. No throwing rice or birdseed. We can't toilet paper anything. There's no confetti throwing to be had. And we definitely can't throw glitter. However, I'm okay with the no glitter law. I too hate glitter with a passion. What a mess. You can't ever get it out of anything. Well, what a bummer. But in our misery of not being able to create a mess that someone else will have to clean up, we've been invited by a fellow merrymaker to a costume party. Then we find out we cannot go in a priest or nun's costume, or any other religious figures for that matter, because it's illegal to impersonate a religious figure. We'll just have to find another costume to wear. So, while we're at the party, we can attend it without worrying that if the venue catches on fire, the fire department won't have to fight off an alligator tied to the fire hydrant, because it's illegal to tie one to a fire hydrant. It's nice knowing that the fire department can reach that hydrant unimpeded. Now, after we leave the party and enjoying some merrymaking, don't get too big for your britches and get carried away and start looking for a bear to wrestle, because that too is illegal in Alabama. Don't go trying to fight one either. You'll end up in the clinker. Well, we've had a full day, so let's retire to the hotel motel. Keep in your lane, though, and go straight to your own room by yourself. Don't go getting a Roman eye. Adultery is illegal, which I don't know why this is on an odd law list. I think this is a good one to have myself, but anyway. The next morning, we wake up and decide to find some more adventures to experience around the state on our way back home. It's Sunday morning, and so before we set sail again, we decide to visit one of the beautiful churches in the area for Sunday morning service. As we get to the church just in time for singing and preaching, we have to take our fake mustaches off, because they may cause laughter in church, and that's illegal. No sweat, we can put them back on after the service is over and we hit the open road again. Now that we're back on the road again after church, we can find a nice little town along the way back home to stop by and have a bite to eat and mingle with the locals. However, we'll have to be careful, because in some places in Alabama it's illegal to play dominoes on Sunday, as well as shooting, hunting, card playing, and racing. We'll have to steer clear of those locals trying to entice us with any of those shady dealings since it's Sunday. Now, we're taking a different route back home. I think you should always take a different route than the way you came. That way you see more of the country. But anyway, we're taking another route back home, and we'll be going through Lee County, Alabama. And I've got a hankering for some boiled peanuts. So if I want to purchase some in Lee County, we need to make sure we hit Lee County up for those peanuts before sundown, because after sundown, it's illegal to sell any kind of peanuts in Lee County. Now, while we're on the road back home, if we pass a prison camp or a prison, we need to be alert for any purveyors of liquor trying to slip some liquor into those prisoners. Liquor in prison or prison camps in Alabama is illegal. This is yet another law that makes it on some weird law list for Alabama, but one I think is rather valid and quite a sensible one. But anyway, while on the way back, you tell me that you feel this trip has been a bust because all these laws have cramped your fun. You suggest we go find a fortune teller, a palm reader, an astrologist, or a clairvoyant person. Now, I object because that's against my way of thinking, but you have your own free will. But you won't be able to hire such a person in Colbert County, as it's illegal to take compensation for such services in that county. So you give that idea up, to my relief. Now that we've made it back home, you're still feeling the trip was a bit of a bust. So you suggest we flick some boogers into the wind for a thrill and giggle. But wouldn't you know it, that too is illegal in the state of Alabama. What an oppressive state. And I hope you catch my sarcasm there. Now, folks, the laws I mentioned in that little story were all on the books at some point in Alabama's history. Some of them have been overturned, some still remain, and some have been altered, updated, and the consequences of breaking them have changed over the years. I may just have to do a deeper dive on this subject another time to break these down and maybe add some more that I missed this time around. While we're on the subject of road trips, if you find yourself over in northwest Georgia, specifically Marietta, and you have not noticed a big old chicken on the roadside attached to a restaurant, well, friend, you might have been blinking too long. That thing's hard to miss. 40-some-odd feet tall, bright white feathers, red comb, yellow beak, and eyes that look like they've seen every traffic jam on Cobb Parkway since the Eisenhower administration. The big chicken hatched back in 1963 when a local KFC franchise decided a regular old sign just wouldn't do. They built a giant fiberglass chicken, complete with rotating eyes and a beak that opens and closes, to lure hungry motorists. And buddy, it worked. People might forget street names, but they never forgot the chicken. Down in Cobb County, directions don't start with turn left at the light. They start with, you know where the big chicken is? Well, keep on going till you pass it. It became such a landmark that locals use it as a compass point. If you say you're north of the big chicken, well, folks instantly know where you mean. Like anything that's been standing watch for decades, the big chicken's had its molting seasons. It's been rebuilt more than once, most notably in 1993 and again in 2017, to keep it safe, sturdy, and shining. The newer versions stay true to the original look, right down to the goofy charm. The big chicken has strutted its stuff far beyond Marietta. It's been mentioned on local radio, traffic reports, referenced in movies and TV shows. One show in particular, Designing Women, used it as a reference point throughout the episode when they were having problems with an order fulfillment from Textile City. And it's famous enough that even CNN once used it as a directional marker. Now, folks, that's when you know that you've made it. Not when you're on postcards, but when traffic reporters trust you more than mile markers. Because it's pure southern roadside Americana. It's a wink and a grin in fiberglass form. In a world full of GPS pins and chain store sameness, the big chicken says, relax, you're in Georgia now. It's familiar. It's rooted in childhood memories. It stands out from cookie-cutter big box stores and generic prefab coffee shops. So if you ever find yourself rolling through Marietta, tip your hat or your bucket of extra crispy to that towering bird. He's been standing there a long time, keeping watch, pointing the way, and reminding folks that sometimes the best landmarks are the ones that don't take themselves too seriously. Well, folks, we've come to that point in the show where it's time to take a short break. When I come back, I'll be telling you about Horsepens 40, a North Alabama landmark famous as a bluegrass hotspot. I'll also be telling the story of the night the stars fell on Alabama, as well as the story of Ann Hodges, the Alabama woman who was struck by a meteorite while napping and lived to tell about it. Also, if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's free and it certainly helps the channel out as well as keeps you informed when I release new episodes of the Down Home Show as well as other story treats. So stay tuned, I'll be right back. Welcome back. Now friend, pull that chair a little closer after refilling that sweet tea. Imagine a cool breeze blowing across the top of a mountain in northeast Alabama, with the sun setting in the west casting a burnt orange and deep golden yellow glow across the horizon as far as the eye can see, because that's exactly where the story of Horsepens 40 begins. Up on Chandler Mountain, not far from the little town of Steele in St. Clair County, with the small hamlet of Gallant just on the other side at the bottom of the mountain, sits one of the strangest and most ancient landscapes in the state, a place where enormous sandstone boulders are stacked and scattered across the mountaintop like someone dropped a box of giant marbles. Some of those rocks date back hundreds of millions of years, with the sandstone itself belonging to the Pottsville Formation, formed roughly 310 million years ago. But the rocks are only the beginning of the story. The real tale is about the people who have passed through those rocks for thousands of years. Now folks, the air is cooler up there than it is down in the valleys, and the wind moves through the trees in long steady breaths. Scattered across the mountaintop are enormous sandstone boulders, some as large as houses, stacked, leaning, and piled together in ways that make the whole place look like the ruins of some ancient stone city. That place is called Horsepens 40, and its story stretches back far beyond the memory of the state of Alabama itself. Now, those rock formations that make Horsepens 40 famous began forming long before human beings ever walked the earth. At that time, the land that would become Alabama lay near the edge of an ancient inland sea. Rivers carried sand and sediment down from the distant mountains, and those sediments slowly hardened into sandstone. Over millions of years, erosion worked its quiet magic. Water seeped into cracks, winters froze and split the stone apart, and entire sections of the rock broke loose and settled into the maze of boulders that now cover the summit of Chandler Mountain. Now, long before the first European settlers reached the region, people were already living among those rocks. The stone shelters at Horsepens 40 provided natural protection from wind, rain, and summer heat. Beneath many of those rock overhangs, archaeologists have found evidence of ancient campsites and burial grounds, suggesting that the location was not just a temporary stopping place, but an important cultural site used by generations of native peoples. By the time written history begins to mention the region, Horsepens 40 lay in territory used by the Muskogee Creek and later by the Cherokee Nation. The geography of the mountaintop made it unusually useful. The massive boulders from narrow corridors and enclosed spaces that resemble giant corrals made of stone. According to long-standing regional accounts, Native Americans used these natural formations to capture and hold horses, especially during times of conflict. Horses that had been taken in raids or captured from enemies could be driven into the rock enclosures where escape was nearly impossible. From this practice came the name that eventually stuck to the property, Horsepens. Another story passed down in local tradition claims that the site served as a meeting ground between the Creek and Cherokee tribes, who both claimed territory across northeastern Alabama. One account suggests that an agreement intended to bring peace between the two nations was negotiated among those rocks. Now, folks, historians debate, as historians usually do, the exact details, but records confirm that the area stood near the boundary between Creek and Cherokee influence for generations, making it a logical place for meetings and negotiations. During the early 19th century, the Cherokee established farms and settlements throughout northeastern Alabama. That era ended in 1838, when the United States government forced the Cherokee people from their homeland in the removal known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands were driven west toward present-day Oklahoma. The mountains and the valleys around Horsepens 40 were part of the land they were forced to leave behind. In decades that followed, settlers moved into the region and began farming the land around Chandler Mountain. During the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, the rocky summit once again became a place of refuge. Local families from the surrounding valleys drove horses, cattle, and other livestock up the mountain and hid them among the boulders. The twisting passages between the rocks created natural hiding places where animals and supplies could remain out of the sight from passing troops. Some accounts from the region say that families also carried food stores and valuables up the mountain when they feared raids or troop movements nearby. Eventually, Confederate soldiers operating in the region learned about the hiding place. Once discovered, the mountain site was reportedly used as a temporary supply location for Confederate forces traveling through northeastern Alabama. The natural stone enclosures that once held horses for native tribes now served much the same purpose during the Civil War. The modern name Horsepens 40 comes from the period after the Civil War. In the 1880s, a man named John Hyatt, originally from Georgia, purchased land on Chandler Mountain. The property was divided into several parcels of about 40 acres each, a common way of describing land in deeds of that era. The Hyatts referred to these sections as the Home 40, the Farmin' 40, and the Horsepens 40, the last of which contained the unusual rock formations where livestock could be enclosed naturally by the surrounding stone. Over time, the descriptive name, Horsepens 40, became the official name used for the property. For decades, the land remained primarily a farm and pasture. The rocks were known locally, but the place remained largely a regional curiosity until the middle of the 20th century. That changed in 1958 when Warren Musgrove, a Birmingham newspaper reporter, visited the property while working on a story about the Hyatt family and farming on Chandler Mountain. Musgrove immediately recognized something unusual about the site. One section of the rock formations formed a natural stone amphitheater, with large boulders rising like walls around a flat open space. Musgrove purchased the property and turned it into a gathering place for bluegrass music festivals. Musicians set up their instruments along the rocks, and the sound of fiddles, banjos, and guitars carried across the mountain. Because the stone walls reflected the sound naturally, the amphitheater created a remarkable acoustic effect that musicians quickly came to appreciate. During the 1960s and 70s, Horsepens 40 became a well-known stop for bluegrass performers traveling across the South. Musicians who would later become major figures in American roots music, including Ricky Skaggs and Emmylou Harris, appeared at events held there during those years. Crowds camped among the rocks, listened to music under the stars, and watched the sun set over the ridges of the Appalachian foothills. In recent decades, Horsepens 40 has gained another reputation. The unusual sandstone formations provide ideal terrain for bouldering, a form of rock climbing done on shorter rock faces without ropes. Climbers from across the United States and from other countries now travel to Chandler Mountain to test themselves against the sandstone problems scattered throughout the rock field. Today, Horsepens 40 operates a nature park and an outdoor recreation site sitting roughly 1,500 feet above sea level on Chandler Mountain. Visitors hike through the rock maze, explore ancient shelters, attend music festivals, and watch sunsets that spread across the valleys of northeastern Alabama. But even with all that modern activity, the deeper history of the place remains close to the surface. Beneath those towering sandstone boulders are traces of ancient campsites, burial grounds, Civil War stories, and generations of travelers who climbed the mountain long before highways and state lines existed. Horsepens 40 is more than a park. It's a mountaintop where geology, Native American history, Civil War survival, Southern music culture, and modern outdoor adventure all share the same 40 acres of Alabama stone. And every wind that moves across those rocks carries a little bit of each chapter of that long story. When I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, our class took a trip to Horseman's 40 for a festival that featured an Indian powwow. I can remember vividly, thoroughly enjoying that experience. I also remember trying deep-fried gator tail there, of which I will never forget. I guess I got a hold of a bad piece of tail because I was sick for 2 days afterwards. By the way, it does not taste like chicken. It tasted like old, deep-fried, greasy swamp. Now, let's talk about an event that became known as the night the stars fell on Alabama. Now, us Alabamians have always had a way of naming a thing so plain and true it sticks for generations. And that's exactly how we wound up with a phrase that still sounds like somebody's grandma is telling it by lamplight. The night the stars fell on Alabama. It wasn't poetry at first. It was a report, an honest attempt to put words to something so unlook-at-able that your brain would keep trying to turn it into a Bible story or a sign or a warning. The calendar said November 12th through the 13th, 1833, and the hour was the kind of late night that feels like the world is asleep all the way to the horizon. Across the eastern half of North America, people started noticing shooting stars. Nothing too unusual at first. Then, as the night deepened, it became something else entirely. By the small hours, witnesses described a sky so full of streaking light, it was hard to pick out a patch of darkness to rest your eyes on. Modern historians and scientists describe it as the Leonid meteor storm, and estimates from collected observation put it at tens of thousands up to well over 100,000 meteors an hour at its peak. Now, you and I have both seen a meteor or two. Blink and you'll miss it, like a match struck and snatched away. But this wasn't one bright scratch across the sky. This was a downpour. The Library of Congress, writing about how newspapers captured the event in real time, describes people being awakened around the early morning hours when the light and the commotion outside made it impossible to stay in bed. Then the meteors kept on coming until daybreak. The Smithsonian's account pulls in contemporary newspaper language that gets right to the point. Meteors came so fast it was impossible to count them, and at times the earth was lit as with the morning light. In Alabama, the story latched on especially hard, partly because the night sky down here can be so wide and generous, and partly because folks were already living close to the rhythms of darkness and dawn. When you don't have electric lights blurring the heavens, the sky isn't background scenery. It's the roof over your life. And that roof, on that night, looked like it had caught fire. One Alabama newspaper, the Florence Gazette, put a sentence on the paper that people have repeated ever since. It described thousands of luminous bodies shooting across the sky in every direction, with little wind and no clouds, the meteors arriving in quick succession. That's not a writer trying to be cute. That's somebody doing their best to report what their eyes couldn't quite organize. And you can almost hear the human side of it in the gaps between those words. The way folks would have stepped out onto their porches barefoot, the way dogs would have been confused by all the shouting, the way the whole countryside, cabins, farmhouses, little towns, would have had faces tipped upward like sunflowers. Here's the part that needs saying plain, because stories like this pick up extra lace as they get passed down. People did interpret it in dramatic ways, and that's well documented. In 1833, plenty of Americans, especially in deeply religious communities, understood unusual sky events through a biblical lens, and this one was so overwhelming it naturally stirred up talk of judgment, prophecy, and or warning. That isn't a knock on anyone's faith. It's just what humans do when the universe puts on a show bigger than our everyday explanations. But what's equally true, double verified by the historical record, is that this night didn't just scare people. It also pushed science forward. A Yale professor named Denison Olmsted saw the storm and quickly realized that if anyone was going to understand what happened, they'd need observations from lots of places, not just one scholar's notebook. So he did something that feels modern as tomorrow. He used the mass media of his day, newspapers, to ask ordinary witnesses to send in what they saw, when they saw it, where in the sky it seemed to come from. The Library of Congress calls it one of the earliest examples of a crowdsourced scientific project, with Olmsted's appeal being reprinted widely and people responding from across the country. The American Meteor Society likewise notes that Olmsted invited amateur observations into the work and received reports from the entire eastern half of North America. Out of that pile of letters and descriptions came an essential insight. The meteors seemed to radiate from a fixed point in the sky, in the constellation Leo, which is why we still call them the Leonids. And today we can name the culprit with clean modern certainty. The Leonids are caused by Earth plowing through debris left along the orbit of Comet 55P/Tempel-Tuttle, which loops around the Sun roughly every 33 years. In most years, the Leonids are modest, pretty, but not life-changing. But occasionally, Earth hits a richer strand of that debris, and the skies turn into a waterfall of light. And that's what happened in 1833. So how did Alabama's Night of Astonishment become a title you can hum? That part of the story steps forward almost exactly a century later in 1934, when an author named Carl Carmer published a book called Stars Fell on Alabama. Carmer had lived and traveled through Alabama in the 1920s, collecting stories, customs, and scenes from all over the state. The Encyclopedia of Alabama notes that the book's title intentionally refers back to that 1833 meteor event, and it gives the publication details, Farr and Reinhardt, 1934, along with the idea that the book blended memoir, history, and cultural observation. The title caught on because it's the sort of phrase that already sounds like folklore even when it's true. And sure enough, that same year the phrase crossed from book cover Alabama into songbook Alabama. The jazz standard Stars Fell on Alabama was written in 1934 with music by Frank S. Perkins and lyrics by Mitchell Parrish. If you've ever wondered why that title feels like it belongs to Tin Pan Alley and a front porch at the same time, that's why. It's Northern songcraft borrowing a Southern image that was already seasoned by memory. Early recordings helped cement it fast. One of the earliest popular versions was recorded by Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians in August 1934, with vocals by Carmen Lombardo. And the tune quickly found its way into the broader jazz repertoire. Benny Goodman and others took their turn with it in that same era. And listen, here's a small but telling detail how myth, fact, and Now, the song itself doesn't try to be a history lesson. It does what great standards do. It takes a true image and turns it into romance. Moonlight and magnolias in one breath. And then, softly, almost as it surprises the singer too, those stars falling again, not as terror this time, but as glitter over a private little moment. And that's how it happens down here. A thing occurs, folks name it the way they'd name a storm or a family story, and then, before you know it, the whole country is singing your local truth back to you like it was always meant to be a chorus. Now, many years later, an Alabama woman would experience something falling from the sky. I can only imagine she felt like the night the stars fell on Alabama could be her theme song. Her name was Ann Hodges, and she was the only person to survive being hit by a meteorite. And when we come back from this short break, we'll learn all about her. So stay tuned. Welcome back. So let's talk about Ann Hodges, the only person to survive being hit by a meteorite. Now, it happened on a quiet fall afternoon in Sylacauga, Alabama. a marble town tucked into the foothills about halfway between Birmingham and Montgomery. The date was November the 30th, 1954, and it was just an ordinary Tuesday, the sort of mild Alabama afternoon when the air feels soft and the sky stretches out wide and blue. Now, the woman at the center of this story was Anne Elizabeth Hodges, a 34-year-old housewife. She and her husband, Eugene Hodges, lived in a small frame house at 204 East 8th Street. The house actually belonged to Gene's mother, Bertie Guy, who rented it out to him. It wasn't a big place, but like most homes in Sylacauga in those days, it was tidy and comfortable. That afternoon, Anne did something a lot of folks in the South did when the day slowed down. She laid down on the living room couch for a nap. Now here's where the story takes a turn that nobody on earth could have predicted. Earlier that same afternoon, folks across Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi started noticing something strange in the sky. People looked up and saw a bright fireball blazing across the daylit sky. Witnesses later described it as a flaming streak, leaving a smoke trail behind it like a jet plane that had caught fire. Now, in Sylacauga, some people thought it looked like a Roman candle. Others said it looked like a small sun dropping out of the sky. A few even thought a plane had exploded. But what they were really seeing was a meteor, a chunk of cosmic rock that had entered the Earth's atmosphere traveling many thousands of miles per hour. And that meteor was breaking apart. Now, one of those pieces, a black dense stone about the size of a grapefruit, came streaking down toward Sylacauga. Back inside that little house on East 8th Street, Anne Hodges was asleep on the couch with a quilt pulled over her. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash. That rock punched straight through the roof of that house, then blasted through the wooden ceiling. It hit a large console radio, which slowed it down just enough, and then it bounced off the radio and struck Anne in the side. It hit her on the left hip and the side of her body, leaving a deep bruise about the size of a grapefruit. Now imagine that, folks, waking up from that nap in pain and totally bamboozled. Anne later said she never saw the rock coming because she was asleep. One moment she was asleep, and the next there was dust and plaster everywhere, and something had hit her like a cannonball. Neighbors rushed over when they heard the commotion. At first, people had no idea what happened. Some thought a boiler had exploded. Others wondered if a plane part had fallen from the sky. Anne was taken to the hospital, badly bruised but alive, and that bruise would later make her famous. Meanwhile, the strange black rock sat there on the floor of the living room. Police were called, and before long the U.S. Air Force showed up, because in 1954, right in the middle of the Cold War, when something mysterious falls from the sky, the military gets curious in a hurry. For a short time, the Air Force actually took the rock for examination to make sure it wasn't some kind of military debris. Scientists quickly confirmed what it really was. It was a meteorite, specifically a chondrite, a stony meteorite that formed early in the solar system billions of years ago. That little rock weighed about 8.5 pounds, and Anne Hodges had just become the first and only person in recorded history to be directly struck by a meteorite and survive. Now, you'd think that would settle the matter right there. But this story had another twist. The meteorite itself suddenly became very valuable. Scientists, museums, and collectors wanted it. And because it had fallen into a rented house, the question became, who actually owned the rock? Anne and her husband Gene said it belonged to them since it had landed in their home and hit Anne. But the landlord, Bertie Guy, said the meteorite landed on her property, so it belonged to her. And before long, what had started as a cosmic accident turned into a legal dispute. For months, the meteorite sat locked up as lawyers sorted things out. Finally, in 1956, the case was settled. Anne and Gene Hodges paid Bertie Guy $500 to gain full ownership of the meteorite. Now today, that might sound like a bargain. Meteorites like that can sell for tens of thousands of dollars now, but back then, the publicity and stress had already taken a toll. The Hodgeses had been overwhelmed by reporters, scientists, and curiosity seekers showing up at their door unannounced. Anne herself reportedly became exhausted by the attention. And I can imagine. Now, not long after the case was settled, the Hodges donated the meteorite to the Alabama Museum of Natural History at the University of Alabama, where it remains today. But that wasn't the only piece of that meteor. Another fragment weighing about 3.5 pounds had landed nearby and was found by a farmer named Julius McKinney. He realized what it might be and wisely contacted authorities. That fragment eventually made its way to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. Scientists named the event the Sylacauga meteorite, after the town where it landed. Now, if you ask astronomers, they'll tell you Earth gets hit by meteorites fairly often, thousands of small ones every year. Most burn up in the atmosphere or land in the ocean or empty countryside. But the odds of one hitting a person, well, that's about as close to impossible as nature gets. Yet, on that quiet Tuesday afternoon in 1954, while a woman in Sylacauga was taking a nap on her couch, the universe reached down from millions of miles away and tapped her on the hip with a rock older than Earth itself. Anne lived until 1972, passing away at the age of 52. And though the meteorite brought her brief fame, she reportedly never quite enjoyed the attention that came from it. But her story lives on, because somewhere out in space, billions of fragments of ancient rock still wander the solar system, and every once in a while, one of them decides to pay Alabama a visit. Only once in all of recorded history has one of them landed squarely on a sleeping human being, and wouldn't you know it, that happened right there in Sylacauga, Alabama, on a quiet afternoon in 1954, when Anne woke up from a nap and discovered that the universe had quite literally dropped in on her. Now, folks, we can't have a show talking about happenings in the sky without talking about the man in Alabama who knows more about what goes on in the sky than anyone else in the state. And his name is James Spann. And around here, he's not the fella who tells you if it's going to rain tomorrow. To a whole lot of people across the state, he's the calm voice in the middle of the storm. And the story of how he became that voice is about as Alabama as red clay roads in a summer thunderstorm rolling over the hills. James Mack Spann was born on June the 6th, 1956 in Huntsville, right up in the Tennessee Valley. Now, Huntsville in the 50s and 60s was changing fast. The rockets of the space program were being tested nearby at NASA facilities in town, and science and technology were becoming part of the local culture. But James Spann's childhood wasn't especially glamorous. His family struggled financially, and life had its share of hardships and ups and downs. What he did have, though, was curiosity, and in Alabama that curiosity often starts with the sky. If you grow up in this state, you'll learn quickly that the weather isn't something you talk about politely at church socials. The weather here can turn dangerous in a hurry. And young James paid attention. Storm clouds fascinated him. Most kids are just trying to pass algebra at 16, but Spann was already working in television. In 1973, at just 16 years old, he got a job running a teleprompter and doing camera work at a small television station in Tuscaloosa. The station was WCFT-TV, which later became part of what we know today as WBMA-TV. Now imagine that for a moment. A teenager sitting behind the cameras in a local TV station, watching the weathercaster point at a map and talk about cold fronts and thunderstorms. Before long, he started filling in on the weather himself. Not because he had some fancy degree yet, because he loved it. Spann eventually decided that if he was going to talk about weather, he wanted to understand it the right way. So he studied meteorology at Mississippi State University, which has one of the country's well-known broadcast meteorology programs. He later completed the university's broadcast meteorology program, earning professional certification that gave scientific credibility to what he was already doing on television. Over time, he also earned the AMS Certified Broadcast Meteorology designation from the American Meteorological Society, that was a mouthful, which is considered one of the most respected certifications in broadcast weather. That meant the guy on TV wasn't just a good storyteller. He knew the science behind the storms. If you ever seen James Spann on television during a severe weather outbreak, you know the uniform. White shirt, tie, suspenders, no jacket. And you know, as an Alabamian, that when James doesn't have his jacket on, something big is about to go down. Now that look wasn't some marketing department idea. It actually started for practical reasons. During long severe weather broadcasts, during outbreaks, jackets get hot under studio lights. So Spann ditched the coat, and without knowing it, he created a type of severe weather alert system for Alabama with just his wardrobe. There's also a joke that says if James loosens his tie and takes his suspenders off his shoulders, then you better be right with the Lord, because there's a huge chance you're about to be in a reenactment of the movie Twister. He eventually joined ABC 3340 in Birmingham in 1996, and that's where he became the meteorologist most Alabamians recognize today. But what truly set him apart wasn't the suspenders. It was how he handled tornado coverage. If you've lived here long enough, you've probably heard the calm, steady voice in the middle of a dangerous night. Take cover now. Be in your safe space. Spann became known for his wall-to-wall tornado coverage, sometimes staying on the air for hours at a time as storms moved across the state. He doesn't just say a tornado warning has been issued. He tells you what town it's near, what road it's crossing, where it's headed next, sometimes down to the specific neighborhoods. He seems to know every small town in Alabama with great detail, even the little wide spots in the road and pig trails that someone may live on. Another long-standing joke in Bama is he knows almost every dwelling in the state and who lives there and if it's a mobile home or not. No one would bat an eye if they heard him say on TV while covering a tornado event, "Now this will impact the Crudup community at 9:02 p.m. in 33 seconds. This will be going over Miss Myrtle's single-wide trailer there on Jackson Road, down behind Lula Mae Ellen's barbecue and tackle shop, which, by the way, has the best lemon meringue pie. Now someone please go knock on Myrtle's door and let her know because she doesn't have cable and has no cell service where she's at." Now, of course, that was a made-up scenario, but no one would bat an eye because that's just how good of a weatherman and Alabamian he is. That's just how well he knows Alabama, its places, people, and things. It also shows how much he cares. A true professional with the skill to pinpoint where the weather is impacting and where it's going next. That approach has saved lives. People across Alabama have said many times that they trusted James Spann enough to act immediately when he spoke. If you ask most people when they remember James Spann the most clearly, they will tell you one date, and that date lives in infamy. April the 27th, 2011. That day, Alabama experienced one of the worst tornado outbreaks in American recorded history during the 2011 super outbreak. More than 60 tornadoes struck Alabama, including several violent EF4 and EF5 storms. During that catastrophe, Spann and his team broadcasted for nearly 12 straight hours, guiding viewers through a constantly evolving emergency. At one point, a tornado even passed near the television station itself, forcing employees into the hallway for safety while coverage continued. The images and warnings from that broadcast are still remembered across the state, and for the country for that matter. Many people later said they survived because they listened to James Spann, and James didn't stop with the TV forecasts. He became deeply involved in weather education and public safety. He helped promote the NOAA weather radios, storm preparedness, and community awareness across Alabama. He's also very active online, sharing weather information through blogs and social media, often answering questions directly from viewers. For a lot of Alabamians, he's the meteorologist they follow every single day. Over the years, Spann has received numerous honors for his work, including Emmy Awards for Broadcast Excellence, recognition from the American Meteorological Society, and the National Weather Association Broadcaster of the Year Award. But the real measure of his reputation isn't a plaque on the wall, it's trust. In a place where tornado sirens are a part of life, the voice people turn to when things get serious is often his. And by all accounts, the man off camera is much the same as the man on television. He's known for being approachable, active in community outreach, and deeply committed to helping people understand the weather that shapes life here in the Deep South. He and his wife Karen have 2 sons, and Spann has spent much of his career living in central Alabama while serving communities across the entire state. Speaking of his wife, one day as he was on air covering a severe weather event, he realized that his home, where his wife was at the time, was in the direct path of a possible tornado. He walked off camera to call her to warn her. That day, their home was impacted and damaged. After contacting his wife, he continued his coverage of the severe weather event, which displayed his professionalism and care for Alabama. Now, if you sat on the porch long enough, anywhere here from Muscle Shoals to Mobile, you'll hear people talk about storms they remember. And more often than not, someone will say something like, "Turn on Spann." That tells you everything you need to know. Because in Alabama, when the sky turns green and the wind starts to howl, folks don't just want a forecast. They want someone steady, someone who knows the land, knows the storms, and knows the people listening. And for decades now, that steady voice has belonged to James Spann. Well, folks, that's all the time I have for today. Join me next time, and be sure to like and subscribe. Please feel free to contact me anytime at contactdownhomeshow@gmail.com. Until next time, y'all, be blessed and watch the skies for fallen debris. And if there's bad weather anywhere around, turn on James Spann.